Tonight, on assignment, Debi Edward is in China as the Communist Party turns 100.
I believe President Xi Jinping in the world of today is the most powerful political leader in the world.
Oh, wow.
Romilly Weeks reports on the water scarcity crisis threatening Malta.
The only point of origin is water. If there's no water, there's no life. That's it. Nothing can live without water, nothing.
And Dan Rivers meets the former circus performers being given a well-deserved retirement in France.
C'est mes enfants. Parce qu'ils sont nés avec nous. Alors c'est de tout plus petits qui sont... On a donné le biberon et tout ça.
Good evening and welcome to On Assignment. Since its conception in Shanghai in 1921, the Chinese Communist Party has grown to be one of the world's most powerful political parties. Earlier this month, it celebrated its 100th birthday with a series of cultural events. Debi Edward reflects on China's journey to the modern communist state it is today. She speaks to the party's fervent supporters, as well as to the families who are suffering under Xi Jinping's increased authoritarian rule. And here's what the younger generation have to say about their country's future.
China is in a party mood. Its towns are painted red. Revolutionary anthems are being revived by communist choirs in the south, and pledges of allegiance recited by students in the north. During this month-long celebration of the Communist Party's 100th anniversary, we have travelled around the country, witnessed a seminal speech by the Chinese president, and talked to those the government has tried to silence.
后来孩子就跑回家，就跟我说了这个，说爸爸被带走了。
As we examine what it takes for one party to prevail in the most populated nation in the world. It's rehearsal time for the Changzhongyuan choir. While the women make sure they look the part, the men warm up their vocals with a stirring victory song. This is one of the country's most famous red ensembles. Hailing from Yudu, they are all the descendants of soldiers who took part in the Long March, a military expedition in the 1930s which gave rise to Mao Zedong as preeminent leader and established the Communist Party in China.
我们在不断地在全国各地演出长征组歌，最主要的就是为了进一步的激活红色基因。 传承红色文化。
The red gene is a concept championed by President Xi to ensure patriotism, civil duty and communist philosophy are passed on through the generations. The choir do that through songs which commemorate the sacrifices their ancestors made for the party. It was clear they feel the weight of their words and the ideological importance of each performance. Yu Yulan became emotional when I asked about her family history.
也是牺牲了，具体牺牲在哪儿了，什么时候牺牲了都不知道。
Chinese citizens are reminded of their painful past to instill a greater appreciation of their present.
我们的农村，就是现在我们都是全国已经脱贫摘帽，已经要奔小康。 20年就奔小康，所以现在我们的生活比10年、20年前那是好了太多了。
The eradication of extreme poverty declared this year was hailed by Xi Jinping as an unparalleled achievement in a century of progress. The Chinese Communist Party was founded in 1921. Mao Zedong, a founding member who went on to rule for 27 years. It was Chairman Mao who introduced the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Two brutal policies, the first causing a famine, The second, a ruthless purge resulting in millions of deaths. They are periods of history now presented as revolutionary struggle. But the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989 has all but been erased from the record altogether. It was in that square where students and their dreams of democracy died that I watched President Xi speak on July the 1st, a speech in which he threatened foreign aggressors and hardened his ambition to reunify Taiwan.
I believe President Xi Jinping in the world of today is the most powerful political leader in the world.
Victor Gao worked for former President Deng Xiaoping in the 1980s. He says Xi chose his words for a domestic and global audience.
President Xi Jinping said the right thing. Don't play fire with China. Don't try to bring a war to China. And if you do, then of course you will bust your own head and then you will be swamped up in your own blood. That's the key message. That's a message, ironically, appealing for peace.
It is with strict social controls and through an almost obsessive ideological agenda that the president maintains an iron grip. This 100th anniversary has prompted a propaganda frenzy, manifested through everything from elaborate street displays to special exhibitions to which so-called red tourists have flocked. But despite the appearance of a unified nation, there are thousands of families being punished for a wide range of offences deemed a threat to national security.
他这个右手颤抖残疾的已经不可以写字，也没有力气刷牙，掉了4颗牙齿，至今还没有给他安装新牙。最近也检查出他的脊椎出现了问题。
Xu Yan has just returned from visiting her husband in prison. Yu Wensheng is a lawyer and is one of hundreds of human rights defenders arrested in recent years. In a closed-door trial, he was sentenced to 4 years in jail for inciting subversion of state power.
他们采取了一些通过老师和孩子欺负的这种方式，去对孩子造成一些伤害。 就是余文生抓捕以后，对我和孩子的影响还是非常大。就是一方面，就是我们经常，比划家附近有7个摄像头，我经常出门被限制出门，出门被跟踪。孩子，很多场景他也都看到，实际上伤害还是很大。
China and its record on human rights are under the global spotlight like never before. It has denied genocide in Xinjiang, where millions of Uyghur Muslims were sent to indoctrination camps under the pretext of an anti-extremism campaign. In Hong Kong, hundreds of the pro-democracy supporters who took to the streets in recent years have been detained. And thousands have fled the former British colony after a national security law was imposed by Beijing. But in the face of international condemnation, and demands for answers about the origins of COVID-19, the Chinese government appears even bolder and more ambitious in its pronouncements.
10 years ago, it's quite different in Beijing, in China, from now.
Wu Qiang held a prestigious role at an elite Beijing university until he travelled to Hong Kong and showed support for the pro-democracy protests. He was fired soon after, and the professor believes his involvement was the reason. He was also blocked from other sources of income as a writer.
中共在过去9年反复强调的，东西南北中，工农商学兵，党是领导一切的。我们现在能够在中国的社会、经济、政治生活当中无所不在的看到党的存在和这种 Big Brother 的存在。
The material improvements in people's lives here are clear to see. A burgeoning middle class has access to everything from high-end fashion to the largest high-speed rail network in the world. And it is continued growth and prosperity which have the next generation devoted to communism.
在未来，我一定会让我的后辈，也 积极的去向党组织靠拢，加入中国共产党，成为一名优秀的中国共产党员。
These students in Langzhou have all recently become party members, taking an oath of loyalty.
我志愿加入中国共产党。我志愿加入中国共产党。
As of this month, there are almost 100 million members, and many of those are young people who only know a rising China.
我觉得欧洲还有美国每一届的大选，更多的，我以中国人角度来看，我更多的像看那一场闹剧。那么相反，中国近几十年来一直在处于一个和平发展的时期，一直在处于一个稳步向前的时期。
Napoleon is quoted as saying, "Let China sleep, for when she wakes, she will shake the world." 2 centuries later, the sleeping giant is awake, challenging global order and maintaining unrivaled domestic control.
Bye-bye.
China's Communist Party is celebrating being 100 years young.
Amy Lee. Debi in China. Next, Malta is a country in the middle of the Mediterranean made up of islands which are lacking in any groundwater whatsoever. Now, with rising global temperatures, the country faces a water scarcity crisis as parts of the islands turn to desert, unable to sustain not only food production, but potentially the people who live there. Romilly Weeks considers whether this problem is the preserve of a select few islands or a monumental challenge that will one day face us all.
For an island nation surrounded by the Mediterranean, it's hard to believe Malta's most pressing concern is lack of water. But go inland and Malta's climate struggle is marked out on the earth. What was once viable farmland is becoming arid. A desert is creeping across Malta. The EU's smallest country has one of its biggest climate-related problems.
I think it's a dream when it rains in January, when it's supposed to be the wettest month. This year it was the hottest month.
Joseph, like his father and grandfather before him, is a potato farmer, but he fears his generation could be where it stops.
As a farmer, have you noticed that it's becoming much drier in Malta? And is that making it much more difficult to farm?
Very difficult, because we're now relying on underground sources of water, and it's becoming unsustainable as well. It's becoming a huge problem in the country, and hand to heart, I think we're going to stop at one point in time.
Do you think farming could die out on Malta entirely?
I think it's already dead. The difficulty is growing, and trees are dying. The carob trees that have at least a century or two, or even some of them 3, are dying. We can't go around it. The only point of origin is water. If there's no water, there's no life. That's it. Nothing can live without water, nothing.
You're never far from the sea in Malta, and yet all of this water masks a difficult truth. There are just 58 days of rain a year on average here. Wonderful for tourists, but barely sustainable for living. And 4 out of the past 6 years failed to meet even that level of rain, which puts Malta on the front line of climate change. Malta is one of the countries that is particularly feeling the effects of climate change already. Can you explain to me how that is being felt here?
As a small island state, it's much more vulnerable to climate change. The reality is that rain is really becoming more and more scarce each year.
Malta clearly has always been very dry, but now it is particularly at risk from desertification.
Yes, definitely. I think if things go on as they are now, in the sense that the lack of rainfall persists, yes, I think we will lose a few of our natural habitats, especially those that are most vulnerable and most susceptible to aridity. In reality, we are minimal emitters in the EU, and the ones that are likely to suffer the most consequences.
Those consequences are exacerbated by Malta's geography. Whilst it's famed for its World Heritage sites like Valletta, get out into the countryside and what's most striking about the landscape is the complete absence of any lakes or rivers. Malta's only source of fresh water is underground, a giant aquifer spreading over 180 square kilometres.
We're going to go 100 metres below ground in this metal cage. The journey should take around 7 or 8 minutes until we get down to the level of the aquifer.
The network of tunnels were dug over 70 years ago. Officially, the aquifer supplies over 40% of Malta's water, but it's being drained by thousands of unofficial boreholes too.
Oh, wow. This is pretty spectacular. How far does the tunnel go in this direction?
This goes to Kandy about 3 kilometers.
And the one in that direction?
5 kilometers, goes to Kaali.
So it's a really big network. The water here is startlingly clear, but it is already becoming more salty, an indication that Malta's greatest natural resource is being used up at a rate faster than it's being replenished. Even this vast underground supply in danger of being sucked dry.
There is rampant abuse of our natural water systems, particularly groundwater. And ultimately, this is a finite resource. To make matters worse, climate change is not helping. And ultimately, this reserve is going to run out.
Marco Cremona is a water engineer and conservationist. He's been instrumental in finding alternative sources of water, including a use for Malta's sewage.
We're here in this landscape, which is showing the effects of the warming climate on Malta, but we're also seeing here part of the potential solutions.
Yes, this installation and 2 others in Malta have been a godsend for farmers. The first stage was to treat sewage to a level that it could be discharged safely into the sea. At a later stage, it was considered that they could go one step further and actually treat it to a better quality that it can be reused for irrigation, especially by farmers. It might sound rather drastic that we're producing good water out of sewage, but actually it's what's required.
Driven by need, Malta has also turned to the sea. This country has become a pioneer in desalination, a process which removes the salt from seawater and turns it into water fresh enough to drink. But it's expensive, and because it uses vast amounts of energy, it makes Malta vulnerable in a whole new way.
This reservoir, which has the feel of an underground cathedral, has been abandoned for decades. Now the Maltese government is restoring it and others like it around the country in an attempt to guarantee Malta's water supply against power cuts which could shut down the desalination plants completely.
So with Malta's water supply facing particular challenges, some here are taking matters into their own hands. Malta's population is one of the most eco-conscious in Europe. For the Vassallo family, water conservation is not a game.
So first of all, tell me about the taps. Tell me how all this works.
So we don't waste too much water. We have this button that stops the water. So like if you just need it to stop just for a little bit, we don't just close it. We just use this and it will stop the water completely from coming out.
I'm impressed by how much the children understand about the process
I speak
as well.
to them a lot because I want them to be aware of the problems and that we conserve water. I do worry a real lot, that too much is being extracted by the people, by the nation, and not much is being placed back by nature, basically. And we can do nothing about it. I mean, you can't just flip a switch and make it rain.
We normally use Echo.
Everything in their house has been designed with water conservation in mind, from water-saving appliances to a system that collects their wastewater to irrigate the garden.
I wanted to make use of rainwater as much as possible and to find ways to decrease loss of water. We collect most of the rainwater that falls over the area of the house. We have enough rains. Sometimes it does serve us through the whole summer then.
And is this because you were looking ahead and thinking water is really scarce on Malta, this is something that everybody's got to take responsibility for themselves?
Yes, I think it's everybody should do his part.
How much do you think about the water that you use?
A lot, because I know that nothing can go on forever. And if we use too much water or we waste too much water, we can't get it back. So we could run out, especially since we are a small island.
Do you learn about conserving water, saving water?
Yes, because if we don't have water in the earth, if we don't have any water, then we can't survive.
During my time on these islands, I discovered that yes, Malta faces particularly difficult climate challenges that are already having an impact on life here. But also they've looked ahead in a way we haven't yet had to, and have a warning about what water scarcity might look like for all of us.
The wars are not going to be about oil. The wars are going to start about water. And that's going to be a large issue in the future. Oil is going to become nothing. Water is going to become everything.
Romilly Weeks in Malta. And finally, last year, the French government announced it intended to phase out the use of live animals in the small travelling circuses which have been a feature of French rural life for decades. Dan Rivers visited the zoo sanctuary in France, where some former animal performers and their handlers are being given a well-deserved retirement.
On what was once a traditional French farm, I've come to meet a man for whom getting a bear hug is quite something to behold.
Ouais, c'est mes enfants. Parce qu'ils sont nés avec nous. Alors c'est de tout petits qui sont... On a donné le biberon et tout ça.
Paolo Tejera and his bears Tonito, Jack and Bambina have all left behind a life on the road with the circus and are now residents of a remarkable refuge in northern France.
Qui eux ils sont bien, nous on est bien. Pour moi c'était vraiment une occasion. Ouais. Ça a été une chance.
The animal sanctuary called La Tanière is on the outskirts of Chartres. I'm here to find out what happens to these performing animals when they're put out to pasture. There are over 600 creatures, great and small here, many utterly out of place in this quiet corner of rural France. All residents of a new 60-acre site being built from scratch by a French telecoms millionaire.
Bonjour, Patrick. Oui, je m'appelle Dan. Enchanté.
Patrick Viola is the epitome of a hands-on philanthropist. He could be sunning himself on the Côte d'Azur, but instead, he's building his dream.
Dans ce projet, on a, mon épouse et moi, on ne peut pas dire investi, parce que si on avait investi, c'est qu'on attendait un retour. Ouais. On a donné 25 millions d'euros.
At vast expense, Patrick and his wife have turned what was a farm into a home for unwanted exotic animals.
On ne se voyait pas aller sur un voilier ou sur une plage, on serait ennuyé considérablement. On a ça dans les gènes tous les deux avec Francine, de travailler, quoi. Et le monde animal nous a toujours passionnés. Moi, mon premier métier, c'est cow-boy. J'étais vaché.
It's lunchtime for the big cats, and chicken is on the menu. Nal, the male lion here, is one of 20 animals to have come from a life in the circus. But many more are expected to arrive in the months ahead. Last year, the government announced plans to ban all travelling circuses from using wild animals in their shows and to make it illegal to breed them in captivity. It's been a wake-up call for a nation that has long loved the circus. For hundreds of years, travelling circuses and their exotic animals have been a bastion of the French countryside. But attitudes have changed, with animal rights groups arguing their well-being is incompatible with a life on the road. Paolo and his wife Lisa have worked in circuses for decades. Their daughters grew up in them. Together, the family brought their own bears and sea lions to La Tanière. Est-ce que vous pensez qu'il y a des cerfs qui sont pas bien,
Oui, il y en a, oui.
qui maltraitent les animaux? Ça existe?
Ça existe, oui, ça existe. Je ne dis pas que non.
Alors il y a une grande différence.
Il y a les deux côtés.
Ouais.
Il y a celui-là qui traite très bien ces animaux, que c'est comme sa famille. Mais c'est vrai qu'il y a des gens qui traitent mal les animaux. J'ai même dénoncé des fois. On a dénoncé. Mais à part de ça, je ne peux pas faire beaucoup d'autres choses.
Youpi! The affinity this family has with these lethal animals is startling. But Lisa says it's critical to their welfare.
Le tigre, c'est pas un chien, c'est un animal sauvage. Il peut vous tuer en 2 minutes. Nous, on peut dire qu'on est spécialisé, surtout moi, Paolo, on est consciente que c'est des animaux. Au moment donné, si tu fais une erreur, n'importe lequel, il peut être considéré pour lui déclencher son instinct de te tuer.
Their close bond with the animals plays a key part in the mission here to rehabilitate creatures which have spent their lives performing.
Les animaux qui sont déjà nés en captivité, on ne peut rien faire. Une fois qu'ils sont en captivité, ben, il faut qu'ils soient avec des personnes capacité vraiment down. Vieni qua, amore, va. Down. Qui sont vraiment en capacité et qui vraiment ils savent qu'à un moment donné, c'est très vite. Moi, j'ai assisté à plusieurs accidents à soigneurs qui avaient trop de confiance, qui pensaient vraiment que... Et c'est là qu'il y a le problème.
Patrick feels the change of law must be handled with great care, as circus animals can become traumatized when separated from their handlers. This is why he allows Paolo and his family to live and work on the site.
Vous verrez l'amour qu'il y a entre ces animaux et ces gens-là. Si demain on sépare brutalement les animaux des gens du cirque, il va y avoir des drames. Et pour les animaux et pour les gens. Je pense qu'une des solutions va être de permettre à ces gens du cirque de s'installer dans des endroits fixes avec leurs animaux. Nous, ici, on est prêts à en accueillir des gens qui viendraient travailler chez nous et qui amèneraient leurs animaux.
Latania is not only home to former circus animals, there are over 25 monkeys who've been rescued from medical testing.
Good boy!
And there's also a special elephant enclosure, where zoos from around Europe can send their bull elephants when they need to separate them from the females. But at the heart of this project are the circus animals. Whilst Latania is offering them a peaceful retirement, not all circus owners are happy.
Pour nous, c'est un génocirque. Nous, on dit un génocirque parce que c'est un génocide. C'est la mort de sociétés, de cirques qui vont mourir. C'est aussi la mort des animaux parce qu'il n'y a pas d'avenir ni de devenir.
Patrick sympathises with those who have nothing but good intentions for the animals. He says the circus industry must evolve.
Jamais je n'entendrai dans ma bouche une critique des gens du cirque. C'est leur vie, c'est leur gagne-pain, c'est comme ça. Mais il faut qu'ils comprennent qu'on ne peut pas enfermer des animaux comme ça dans un camion, même s'ils sont heureux.
For circus animals and their owners, this refuge will be here to welcome them. Latania has had inquiries to accommodate 50 more circus animals as the implications of this new law sink in. What was once a quintessential part of French culture is being faded out. The days of the travelling circus, in France at least, appear to be numbered. The big tops may be gradually disappearing, but those who used to perform under them are being offered a new future here, in conditions Patrick thinks are so much more suitable for these majestic animals and the people who love them.
Dan Rivers in France. That's it for tonight. We're taking a short break, but do join us in September when we will be back with more stories from around the world. Until then, from me and the rest of the team, good night.